Nance is a counterterrorism and intelligence consultant for the U.S. government special operations, Homeland Security, and intelligence agencies. He's also a counterterrorism analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. He assisted in the investigation of the World Trade Center attacks, trained and advised numerous international government agency personnel in terrorist attacks and countering extremist ideology, including U.S. Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security. So if we get in any trouble here on the stage, Malcolm, you are in charge, all right?
Okay.
Malcolm, can I turn to you for a second?
Sure.
So I want to tap this is a panel on Russia, but I want to tap your expertise on the Middle East for a second, if I can. So Saudi Arabia last night fired 5 top officials and arrested 18 others, saying that one of my colleagues at the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi, was killed in a fistfight at the consulate in Turkey. This happened after the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, went to Riyadh, and after Trump said that he wondered about rogue killers, and then later this past week celebrated the beating of an American journalist in Montana. What do these developments in Saudi Arabia tell us about how the rest of the world is reacting to this particular era in American leadership?
Oh. Well, you know, I just came back from the rest of the world. I just spent 2 weeks in London and Paris, and giving speeches and helping get out the vote over there. And one image of us is universal, and this will come all the way back around to Russia. And because the President of the United States right now, Donald Trump, has decided that America will no longer be what America has been for 243 years, and definitely everything since the end of World War II, he wants to dismantle it. That's the Atlantic Alliance, our principal agreements, trade agreements. So Riyadh had been watching this with the rise of their new young crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And for the first time in American history, and I lived there for 7 years, not in Saudi Arabia, but in the United Arab Emirates, just prior to coming back to, the States a few years ago. They saw a president of the United States who could be bought. And prior to that, no president of the United States could truly, individually be purchased by them. Barack Obama couldn't be purchased. George W. Bush, they had interest, but their interests were American interests. Donald Trump changed that dynamic. They saw that he was a luxury businessman. They master luxury over there. Everything's luxurious, right? So they saw that this guy would work for his own interest, his family's interest, and the United States' dignity and honor and human rights could be purchased. And that is exactly what he told them when he went to Riyadh, last year. He said the United States will no longer be considering human rights and other factors in your own nation as a reason to do business with you, which is another way of saying we're going to throw out all of the American experiment and our foreign policy as it's existed since, the Barbary Wars, and we are no longer going to live by American values. And the Saudis love that. And that emboldened them in Trump's attacks and Jared Kushner's secret communications and helped Prince Mohammed bin Salman purge his government using U.S. intelligence, right? Jared Kushner went there with U.S. intelligence. 48 hours later, every rich prince above Mohammed bin Salman had been arrested, including one of the richest men in the world, right? So this use of that information is a power politics dynamic that could not be bought before. And once that was done, combined with his attacks on the press, they saw America going in a completely different direction, which is true. The way that they have always wanted to see America go. A nation that could be like their subcontractors, and I worked over there as a subcontractor, you could be bought, paid for, and told what to do. And now they've done it. And they felt emboldened to get a U.S. resident from Virginia who is a Saudi citizen to actually send an assassination team to abduct him and murder him, and they're surprised that we're getting upset. But they're just waiting for Donald Trump to cut the deal. And there is a deal that is being cut because Trump has already essentially said, we have their excuse, good enough for me. And I call this now the full Kavanaugh, right? Where you can just lie, and then that lie is now acceptable, and I'll call it a sufficient investigation. So, now, well, Malcolm, what does that have to do with Russia? Well, you know, I wrote 2 books on this. As a matter of fact, I will be so bold as to say I am the first person in the United States in media on July 25th, 2016. I went on television. MSNBC had no idea what I was going to say, and I said, the United States is under attack in a wide-ranging, deep cyber warfare and information warfare operation aimed at splitting the Democratic Party in half and electing Donald Trump president. And then I wrote another book, of my first book, that came out 5 weeks before the election, The Plot to Hack America. We are under attack. There is no delusion. The only delusion are those people who no longer care about America's values. And anyone who says, oh, well, you know, this is just the way it was, you know, adheres to Donald Trump's belief, these people literally are throwing out everything they believed before. And there's a reason for that. In my second book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, I have 3 chapters on how Russia uses information warfare. This is old KGB stuff. But it couldn't move fast enough in a time of printing presses and newspapers. Only computers and social media weaponized your freedom of speech. And your freedom of speech allowed them to carry out a technique that's known in the NATO Cyber Warfare Manual as perception management. And they craft your reality. Donald Trump's decision-making algorithm was created within the Russian sphere of influence. That's why when he came out and started talking about foreign policy, the first thing that he talks about is NATO is obsolete. And everybody looked around and said, where did that come from? Russia. The European Union should be dismantled. Russia. These are objectives of our adversaries, not of our nation. We have now had 1/3 of the American public's perception of reality is engineered by a foreign intelligence agency, weaponized through our own information systems, propagated through your friends and family, and now we don't believe what we've ever believed. We are so screwed.
All right, you can't be in the pocket of the Russians and the Saudis at the same time.
Yeah, you can.
You cannot be in the pocket of the Russians and the Saudis at the same time.
Really quickly how you can be. Because when you don't care how you win, you'll take assistance from anybody. And if that means treason, so be it. If that means the Saudis come to you and promise you riches, so be it. If that means the Israelis come to you and say that we can engineer your social media, I've said this on television about 500 times since 2016. There are multiple dirty tricks teams that are being investigated by the special counsel. Not one, multiple ones. And so, yeah, you can do that. I've seen people you've seen people who've committed treason for multiple reasons, not just one.
My point being, though, is that you can't have these countries that think that they're going to run his foreign policy through paying him off, especially something as diametrically opposed as the Saudi royal family in Russia. Russia, whose client state is Iran, and Iran, who is the mortal enemy of the Saudis. The dumb person in the room, we've already kind of had the conversation about who that is, but the Saudis aren't idiots. Putin's not an idiot. The Israelis aren't idiots.
But
yes, they might be able to throw...
common denominator
right.
here.
Right.
Donald Trump, and they know he's an idiot. Therefore, they can play him. Every spy officer, every human intelligence officer can tell you recruit stupid people who are willing to look out for their own interests to betray their nation. So yes, they can work with all 3. The old school realpolitik people would have believed that your 3 ideological factors from these nations cannot compete with each other. But when it's money, it works.
I have a question for you, Malcolm. I have actually both of you. How does the relatively small group of people advantageously spread across 3 states, how do they see Trump as a strong leader when he's a courtesan, beholden to these bookies? Am I mixing up gender stuff? But anyway, and a puppet and whatever else. I mean, he's such a constant source of humiliation to the country, and has made us obviously a laughingstock. And I just don't know, as we come up to the midterms, how he still represents like a Republican patriarch in any way.
He doesn't.
He seems to be. He's so owned.
He doesn't. I used to be a Republican. And he doesn't represent conservatism or republicanism. He represents Trumpism.
The Sergei Skripal thing changed the rules that had been established for about 100 years. He was traded, right? So we captured the Russian 10 I just referred to, and we traded them back to the Russians. Leon Panetta got on the phone, made this trade for 3 of our assets. And he was one of them. Now, in the history of intelligence, going back to when formalized intelligence started during the Renaissance, if you made a spy trade, they were off limits.
Yeah.
You were agreeing that they could live the rest of their natural life and we won't touch them. In 5 minutes of some not really bad tradecraft GRU poisoning, he changed the rules that have been around for 400 years. Now, they've already started changing things too. Diplomats are supposed to be off limits. But there's an exceptional video of an American diplomat in Moscow getting the shit kicked out of him as he's trying to drag himself inside the American embassy there. So there's just a
Which, by the way, happens almost to the day of the Trump Tower meeting.
Yep. So it's just rewriting the way things are done.
If I can make a point, all of this is correct because Russia has adopted under Putin what I wrote in my book I called the DGAF attitude. Don't give an F. We don't care. And so when I saw that, when we analyzed that tradecraft, we talked about this at the Spy Museum at great length. You have to ask yourself as an intelligence professional, why? What's the intervening factor here? What's the strategic play? And when I wrote about Russia's overarching strategy, it became very clear in the run-up to the 2016 election that starting in 2012, they had co-opted a very large part of the conservative movement. Evangelicals were running conferences in Russia. The alt-right was rising under Steve Bannon, which was, positioning themselves like the Russian Nashi, their political stormtrooper youth, and all of these things. And we literally have a 5th column in the United States that facilitated Trump's rise, and Russia knows they all are loyal to Donald Trump and, by extension, to Russia.
But it was always fringe. The people you've mentioned were always fringe, and I think Bill hit
Yeah, but now they're the mainstream. They're speaking in other panels here.
This is not the mainstream,
Right.
No, but my point being this. You could not run an operational mission like that if you knew you were going to get rolled up 100% of the time. But if you're transitioning that nation by recrafting their belief that Russia is an ally and that you're going to own the mindset of 30% of that population, you are eventually going to be running that population. There is a strategy on their part that is a decade old, and they have carried out operations in full since 2012, and we're now seeing what you might call reconnaissance. I'm seeing their activities are just being exposed, but their mission is complete. And we know it because their operation supported the engineering and hijacking a mindset of 1/3 of this nation, and now we're in trouble.
There have been some really interesting discussions today just around the objectives of Russian quote-unquote meddling, cyber warfare, hybrid warfare, whatever you want to call it, probing, getting the sanctions dropped, etc. But Army Asymmetric Warfare Group actually defines hybrid warfare as having the objective of regime change through non-kinetic means, as opposed to the old thing of rolling through the Fulda Gap with a million tanks. And so what I'm wondering is if that really is the goal, kind of like the senior chief was talking about as far as making America essentially not America anymore, then is conspiracy to defraud the United States really the right legal or other framework we should be following here? Not to
Yes.
sound bloodthirsty, but...
Yeah, because we're not at war.
Right.
And, as you say, this is asymmetric information operations designed to craft a new reality around the opponent's population. By the way, I'm quoting the NATO Information Warfare Manual right now. And the purpose of crafting that... It is. As a matter of fact, chapter...
Which one?
Plot to destroy democracy. So...
The one I was on?
The purpose of it, though, is to craft that reality in order to create a favorable operational environment for another nation to essentially run that nation by remote control. That has happened. Mission accomplished.
No, I don't agree with that.
It's not meant. No. 37%.
You think the Russians are running this nation?
Right,
Come on.
37% of this nation right now does not believe a damn word we're saying.
Well, you know what?
And that didn't come from nowhere.
Okay, they're not running this nation. A. B, I would just make this a very intelligent point. I mean, question. There are two kinds of regime change. You want to put it this way. One is actually replacing one regime with another that you prefer. But the other is just causing chaos and weakening a regime that you think is hostile to your own interests. And I think it's much more the latter in the case of the Russians. I don't think they have some notion that we're going to have a Putin-like regime in the United States. I think they have the notion that they can cause a huge weakening and divisiveness and so forth within the United States. And they have done some of that. That I certainly agree with.
And I think we got way ahead of ourselves.
We got like 3 minutes left. Let's do a really rapid fire last.
But real quick, the people that were most surprised about Trump winning were the Russians.
Yeah.
They didn't think, they thought we were going to have a very weak Hillary Clinton president.
Yeah.
So it's not like they thought they were going to win this thing.
Over here.
Given the revelations about Maria Butina's attempts to infiltrate the NRA, is the issue with Russian collusion more Donald Trump's unique vulnerability or a larger Russian attempt to infiltrate the conservative movement and conservative institutions?
Yes and yes.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is recruitable, and he's a dream for human intelligence officers. His vulnerabilities are literally written in the KGB operational recruitment manual of the type of person you want. A self-centered, narcissistic person who can be manipulated. And that being done, Maria Butina was just one of these other phases where they were going after NRA, they went after evangelicals, they went after the alt-right, they went after all these other factors to create people who would be susceptible to this re-engineering of the way their world is.
So from a cybersecurity perspective, right, we have probably the best intelligence agencies in the world that we have ever seen, right? We have data collection methods through nodes on the internet lines and everything along those lines, right? To me, it's a systematic failure from all of these agencies to allow all of these things to happen, and then how do we grant our independence back from a subversion tactic that has basically worked?
I worked at the National Security Agency, and I can tell you right now, they are the commensurate organization. They are the best organization in this world, but they work within laws, okay? And those laws are generally issued through leadership and orders by a person who is running the intelligence community according to our national interest. Russia uses cyber warfare like we drink coffee in the morning. They really have a DGAF attitude because they have an objective that they want to meet that requires introducing chaos, introducing mayhem, weaponizing all these old KGB information warfare techniques at the speed of the electron. And they know democracy cannot keep up. Autocracy can, all right? Those guys can use it as they see fit. I mean, how long did it take us to stop, the concentration camps in World War II and the mass murder? You have to go through a war to stop that. They understand we're not going to do that. So long as they're not shutting off powers on power plants, which kills people, they know that we will have a discussion and a debate about it, and whatever their objective is, they're going to get away with it.